We first we had Sue Kringle and then we had Mairapatu. But wait, there are 3 wahine from Invercargill in the house. Mirahuku has never been so well represented. So I'm not sure what was in the water back then, but it's produced some amazing thinkers. I have the privilege of knowing Christina. She is a senior lecturer here at Otaka Whakaihiwaka ki o Tautahi and is our newest associate Te Māori, so oversees our Māori strategic framework and trying to get us compliant to the obligations that we have to be responsive to Te Ao Māori, and she co-chairs alongside Logan our Māori Health Advancement Research Committee. So it's with great pleasure that we get to hear from Christina today. She is based in the Department of Population Health, and her research has focused on public health nutrition and its relationship to hauora Māori. So homai te pakipaki kia Christina. Yes.
Order. Okay, yeah. Tēnā nō tātou te whare, huri no ngā mihi nui kia koutou katoa, me ngā mihi I ngā āhuatanga o te wā, me whakahonore ki te kinitana, me te whare kāhui ariki. Nā reira, me mihi kawana hau kia rātou. Mai tēnei uri o te taira whiti. I was brought up in Invercargill, but in terms of whakapapa, this is my marae, iri te kura. And I bring this up in relation to the āhuatanga of our day with the passing of Kingitu Heitia. I was fortunate, I'm from the Pewhairangi whānau. One of my tipuna's name was Wee Pewhairangi. That name is actually a little bit about the treaty, because I don't know if you've noticed, but Taira Whiti, not the Pewhairangi. Pewhairangi means Bay of Islands, and apparently that our tipuna was given that name because they wanted to acknowledge the importance of that event that was up there in the Pewhairangi at that time. But I put a picture of my marae up there because my uncle, at the beginning of this year, my uncle Te Aorere Riddell passed away. And my uncle was an educator. He taught at Hato Tipine, and then he was principal of Te Aute, and then he worked in the Ministry of Education in the 1990s when they were setting up Kura Kaupapa Māori. And he supported that mahi in his role. And so I was lucky enough to go to his tangi that was in Tāmaki Makaurau, because he lived there, and then we brought him home to Iri Te Kura. But at Tāmaki Makaurau, all the people that he taught sort of came. And working at Hato Tipine and then at Te Aute, there was the odd MP or ex-MP. But there was also people from the Kura Kaupapa Māori movement. And it was awesome. And also the kingitanga came. And I was in the same room as Kingitu Heitia and 2 truckloads of Tainui people who came up to Auckland to honour my uncle. And, you know, they whakarangatira I rātou I mātou. But you saw, because it was in February, it was just after Waitangi, and you used a wonderful word, existential sort of, just feeling really down, with everything that the Crown was doing. But at my uncle's tangi, you sort of saw the intergenerational legacy and the magic of kaupapa Māori and the people from kaupapa Māori. And I had a conversation with one of my Uncle Awi's mokopuna who was matatau I te reo, way more matatau than me, because they've been brought up with that. And it was just so magic. And Suze, when I was asking Suze what to talk about today, she said, well, just talk about what gives, I don't really know what to talk about. Suze, you've gone and voluntold me, and I'm really nervous. And she said, talk about what brings you joy. And so for me, even though I was at a tangi, in a funny way, it brought me joy at that time in February, because it was just so awesome to sort of see that magic. And so for me, reflecting on my research, I've always worked in the kai space. I started thinking about whether I was researching in a rangatiratanga space or whether I was doing research to try and help the kawana do better, which is a depressing space to be. Yeah, so that, yeah, he mokapanahe no te tairāwhiti, one side Tokomaru Bay, and then my grandfather's from Ruakituri, and Suze is the only person I've ever met who actually knows where Ruakituri is. And having that whakapapa is quite good for understanding the treaty too, because on one side you've got a name, Pewharangi, there, kind of associated with the treaty relationship, but on the other side, on my Ruakituri side, there, Tūhoi and Kahununu. And one of my uncles has a t-shirt, Tūhoi, never surrender, never retreat. So I don't know if Christopher Luxon wants to go and say people ceded sovereignty, he should go to Ruakituri, and they'd tell him off. Anyway, yeah, I wanted to talk about, in terms of what brings me joy, just connecting with kai and kōrero, because a lot of my research has been in the kai space, and a lot of it's done through kōrero, although I have tried to understand quantitative methods occasionally, badly. But I wanted to honour both my mum, Mā Koini, and you can't see it because of the bottom of the screen, but she's got some tuna from Ruakituri, our awa. And then on the other side is my son Isaac, and he's holding up some mau sort of from the water, the moana in Tairāwhiti. Yeah. And one of my very first research projects I did after masters back in the day was around food security, food poverty, because we knew even back then that there was not enough kai. Our people were not having enough kai. And it was, I was in a project with colleagues from Wellington, and it was called Enhancing Food Security for Māori, Pacific and Low Income People. And we were trying to sort of build policy solutions. We had a health economist look at smart cards. If you gave people a discount, would that then work? We had food industry solutions, and my job was the Māori focus groups, and I was running a Māori focus group. And I remember vividly someone going, well, what about us? What about our solutions? What about our kai? And I was like, oh, okay, it's my job to do that. But it was an awesome, as part of my job, I got to read all the papers to do with mahinga kai. I was so happy. And we ended up writing a paper sort of based around the role of traditional kai, and we had a loosely based for traditional definition, and enhancing our kai security. And one thing we realized was definitions really, really matter in writing that paper. That and I know Madeline Schelling is in the room, and she did an entire PhD around how people are defining. Because one of the things I realized is that sometimes in Pākehā research, they define things really, really narrowly, and then you go to a Māori space and they define things way more broadly. And even in terms of where you're getting kai from as well is important. That's the paper there. And one of the things I learned writing that paper as well, which I think I always knew, is I think talking about kai is not a new thing. I think we've always valued a safe and secure food supply. And I know Karen Keelan is not in the room, but if she was here, she would know exactly the words of the ori pōpō that I've got there. And so I think we have a mātauranga around kai. And just acknowledging, even though this is a Matariki series, it's also getting close to koanga. But again, on definitions, while I was doing that work, I was taught the word food sovereignty. My friend Leonie Matoi told me about the word food sovereignty, and I was, oh, I like that word, because, you know, food security it just means people having access to adequate food, which is important. But you can arguably solve food security by, I don't know, giving people a protein bar, which is, I think, what David Seymour wants to do in the Food in Schools program. But food sovereignty is completely different. It has an analysis of where that kai is coming from. There's a really good definition by Jessica Hutchings, who's a Māori food sovereignty tohunga. Māori food sovereignty, practice of ensuring food secure futures for whānau, independent of national food systems and in harmony with our Māori. So far broader definition. But I think food has always been political, and you don't think a conversation about food is about the treaty, but actually it is, because that is a carving there from Papa Waimarai in the Wairarapa, home of the Kotahitana movement. And that Pauwhakairo laments the loss of tuna and Pātiki with the draining of Lake Wairarapa with the colonists. And so I think our right to kai is inseparable from other rights. And it's still political. And I totally acknowledge the Ngaita who fight for your mahinga kai. And around closer to where I am, that they were fighting over foreshore seabed because of the foreshore seabed allowed the Crown to say that they could give rights for people to drill up oil, and that would impact our Pātaka kai. And I found when I looked at the literature for that paper, we've arguably experienced a nutrition transition, which is a word dreamt up by a nutrition researcher who I should have written down. But this idea where your food habits have changed over time. And yeah, that has happened, but it's happened because of other definitions about whenua and people turning kai into a commodity and not protecting our moana. Just really aware of time. There's also research out there in the racism space from the Whakatika survey, which was a survey that Te Atawhai Aotearoa Māori Research Organisation did around racism. And they they found that people, when you couldn't get traditional kai, that was a loss. And they equated it with racism because the fact that you couldn't get that kai was a result of racist practices from councils, that kind of thing. I don't think this is anything new here. And then the other thing I sort of found, and I'm not sure what happened there with my slide, but there were beautiful examples of imaginative solutions by Māori, and which is what we focus the paper on, all the wonderful examples of the efforts our people are doing to build kai sovereignty and acknowledging the work down here in the mahinga kai space. But also we found more recently with Ihu Mātou, the people there have gone on to start a whenua warrior program, that kind of thing. So in the policy space, this is me as a researcher who likes kōrero trying to figure out quant. And the reason why I did that was because I was sitting in a Ministry of Health science person going, this is the research we will listen to you from you researchers. We will listen to burden of disease epidemiology studies. I was like, okay, yeah, that's a bit reductionist. But I teamed up, I was given the opportunity to team up with another researcher, also from Otago, there she is there, ChristinaMcKerchar. And she's an epidemiological modeler. And we did this project, and this is a project very much in the kawana space, trying to sort of do research that will hopefully influence policy, although I'm not hopeful right now. And she was trying to do modeling about policy, and we even did a video about modeling, but I don't think there's enough time to show it. But if any of you are interested in how epidemiological modeling works, we tried to make it explainable. But she was interested in policy that would move New Zealanders towards eating healthy, sustainable kai. What kind of policies could we come up with? And we had a kōrero with lots of people, kōrero to all different groups. And the people, and we also talked to Māori, both rural and also urban. And people who are not in policy settings are way, way more imaginative at what they come up with. It was awesome. Listen, but the policy ones are not imaginative at all because they're constrained by their, you had a great word for it. And so the people came up with over 111 unique policy suggestions that we could do to move towards people eating healthy kai. And a lot of it was around how land is used and advice for the government. And then we ranked the policies, and then Christina modeled the top 6. And within what the policies Christina modeled, we listened to Māori and we allowed the Māori people involved in the project to rank. So the number one thing we Christina modeled was around what would happen if you had kai a little bit cheaper? What then might be the impact? And it doesn't necessarily have to be removing GST, but what would happen if it was 15% cheaper, whatever the mechanism? And, you know, she found awesome health gain from that particular policy. Really, and good equity, and, you know, yeah, and it would actually save the government. So it's not as if we don't have the evidence, because there's a heap of evidence in the nutrition space. But one of the things we did in that project was we carved off a space for a kaupapa Māori research project. So Hemi Enright, he did his research around the kōrero coming through from our Māori focus groups and Māori people we interviewed. And he ended up calling his dissertation, "What about haumea? What about rongo?" Because we were talking to the group in Tairāwhiti about Māra, and one guy was like, what about the haumea? What about the kai from the bush? How are you protecting that? So that was really cool. And people will tell you that there was not a unique Te Awa Māori way of viewing something, but after talking with both Māori and also non-Māori about exactly the same subject, there was definitely a mātauranga Māori coming through. People, you know, talking about haumea and rongo. And people talking about the kōrero tuku iho, and sharing the stories, which is why I wanted to call my what I'm doing, calling it kai and kōrero. But I just wanted to finish with this slide, and this is from one of our Māori kai sovereignty experts who I interviewed, and it's again like my response as to what is bringing me joy right now. And at the moment, I'm not watching the news, but I'm gonna get a really good kumara crop on this year. Kia ora koutou.
Kia ora, Christina. When you have lunch with Christina, you always make healthy choices. She doesn't tell you to, but it's just something that oozes from her that tells you to leave the chocolate behind.